This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Detained South Korean workers at a U.S. battery plant are on their way to board a plane that will take them home after an intense week of diplomacy between Seoul and Washington. From a failed martial law bid by his predecessor to the recent fallout with the U.S. over migrant workers, South Korean President Lee has had his hands full. We'll take a look back at his first 100 days in office. Japan and the Philippines deepening their defense cooperation, a pact that allows their troops to enter each other's territory for training and joint operations takes effect today. And ASEAN leaders wrap up a days-long ministerial meeting on transnational crime. The Southeast Asian bloc is seeking to strengthen its coordinated enforcement for collective security. And Mexico bows to U.S. pressure, saying that it will raise tariffs on automobiles from China and other Asian countries to 50%. Ahead on the bulletin, Pacific Islands leaders launch a climate action fund after bureaucracy made it difficult for the region to access financing it needs to stave off the impact of global warming. Hundreds of South Koreans detained last week in a U.S. immigration raid have been released, bringing to an end days of an all-out diplomacy between the two allies. They were arrested about a week ago at the site of an electric vehicle battery plant run by Hyundai and LG Energy Solution. And of the 317 South Koreans released from detention, one declined voluntary departure. The remaining 316, along with 14 other nationals, are now traveling to Jackson Atlanta International Airport, where they will board a chartered Korean airplane to return home. Well, the workers will be leaving the U.S. in the form of voluntary departure, which allows them to return, as opposed to deportation, which bars them from coming back. Well, this thorny issue topped the agenda for South Korean President Myung, who spoke at a media conference to mark his first 100 days in office. He said that the battery plant raid could have had an impact on investment in the U.S. CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yeon-sok has more.
South Korean President Lee Jae-myung touched on several issues from the economy to inter-Korean relations in his opening speech. He only addressed last week's raid on a battery plant in the U.S. state of Georgia when asked by a reporter about the issue. Mr. Lee said it was creating a lot of confusion and blamed it on cultural differences, saying that in South Korea it is not seen as a serious issue when Americans teach English while on a tourist visa.
더군다나 이민국의 정책이 불법 이민 취업 절대 안 된다. 그래서 온갖 과격한 모습으로 이렇게 추방하고 있죠. 우리도 거기 한 케이스로 아마 단속됐던 것 같은데.
But he warned that there could be an effect on business confidence if Washington fails to improve its visa system for South Korean workers. He said they are in talks on possibly issuing investment-related visas, securing additional quotas, or creating a new visa category. Seoul pledged $350 billion in investments as part of a trade deal with Washington in July.
아마 진출한 우리 기업들이 매우 당황스러운 상태일 거예요. 기업들 입장에서는 미국의 현지 공장을 설립한다는 게 이거 앞으로 온갖 불이익을 주거나 아니면 어려워질 텐데 이거 해야 되나? 이런 고민을 안 할 수가 없겠죠. 그게 아마도 앞으로 대미 직접 투자에 상당히 큰 영향을 미칠 수가 있죠.
On inter-Korean relations, President Lee says Seoul cannot resolve ties with Pyongyang alone, adding that North Korea has so far remained cold to its efforts to ease tension.
지금은 가장 강력한 영향력을 미칠 수 있는 게 트럼프 대통령이다. 그리고 미국이라고 하는 요소도 중요하지만 미국의 대통령 트럼프라는 사람의 특성이 또 한반도 평화 안정 확보에 더 도움이 된다. 지구의 마지막 남은 분단국가, 또 세계 불안정의 가장 큰 요소 중에 하나라고 할 한반도 평화 문제를 실질적으로 진전을 만들어내면 뭐 진정한 피스메이커 아니겠습니까?
The main opposition People Power Party was quick to denounce his press conference.
화성에서 오신 분인가 하는 느낌을 받았습니다. 구름 위에 둥둥 떠다니면서 온갖 미사 여구는 내놨는데 현실감은 전혀 없다. 그런 생각이 들었습니다. 외교에 있어서는 모든 것이 다 합의되기 전까지는 어떤 것도 합의되지 않는다. 이런 격언이 있다고 하셨지 않습니까? 가장 기본이 되는 그런 부분들을 전혀 이해를 못하는 게 이재명 정권인 것 같습니다.
Mr. Lee said the past 100 days since he became president following his predecessor Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment were full of difficulties. He added that the remaining 4 years and the 9 months in office will be a time of leap and progress. Lim Yang-suk, CNA, Seoul.
For more insights, we now speak with Kim Young-ju, an affiliate professor at the Hankook University of Foreign Studies. Well, thanks, Professor Kim, for joining us this evening. First, I thought we would perhaps pick up the recent flashpoint in President Lee's first 100 days, and that is a U.S. raid on Hyundai workers. How do you think this incident has actually tested what he says he's going to be using, this pragmatic approach or leadership in managing relations with Washington as well as those Korean firms?
Yes, I guess it was indeed a very big test on his side and his approach for sure. But the thing is, however, the whole cause of this whole situation was made by the Trump administration. So I think Korea was on the side of watching it and responding to it altogether. And I think at the end, the result of it is Korea got a kind of like an upper hand, not exactly that, but maybe negotiating card in negotiations, in the future negotiations of setting up these kind of facilities and making investment going forward. So a liability has been added on the side of Trump administration here. So on the Korean side, I think it will be carefully calibrating its future approach. I think President Lee himself made it very clear that Korean side, rather than government kind of like rushing out in reaction to this, rather, we'll be carefully watching, he said, how Korean companies and businesses will be dealing with this going forward. So on that issue in Korea, rather, I think we are kind of like sitting back and watching what's going to happen going forward.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying, that Korea actually has the upper hand in this particular dispute. But we talk about trade friction now, right? How do you think that upper hand, how with all these tariff disputes, how do you think President Lee has actually navigated these uncertainties so far, and how he could perhaps use this latest U.S. raid on Hyundai workers to, put a bit more pressure on the U.S.?
Yeah, his President Lee's biggest success is not making the whole situation anything like flamboyant and too sensitive here. His first encounter with Donald Trump at the White House was a huge success in the sense that we did not create the situation where a lot of people were afraid of having the so-called Z moment, Zelensky kind of moment. Rather, they had a very smooth encounter and exchange, talking mostly about North Korea and Kim Jong-un and President Trump himself being a quote-unquote peacemaker and so on. So overall, very smooth start. In a way, one can say avoiding the conflictual issues of tariff. And the thing is, the way I see it, and according to many other observers as well, this is good for us because rather than two heads of the states talking about all the details about tariff while they're sitting together, just leaving all the details aside was a better idea because as a fact, the key fact here is that this is going to be an ongoing negotiation that could continue on forever. With the Donald Trump administration in the White House, they'll always come back to us with different numbers, different requests and stuff like that. So this is a perpetuated, ongoing negotiation that all countries face in dealing with the United States going forward. So in that sense, not coming down with all the specifics and firm facts about tariff itself was a big success as a starter.
And let's shift to Pyongyang, which President Lee has pledged to improve ties with North Korea. But do you see the early gestures he has done, like removing those loudspeakers, laying the groundwork for some real, actual progress down the road?
Well, that's what those people here in the Korean government who want to see better relationship with North Korea are hoping for at the moment. And we don't know what kind of effect it has created because we haven't got much response at all. We had some kind of, a very weak response or a skeptical response from North Korea, kind of rejecting the offer made so far. And so, they have not been very good in terms of their response, so-called. And I think Lee Jae-myung government, President Lee himself and his government are very realistic about this. They are doing all they can to reach out to North Korea, to call for peace and more kind of cooperative gesture with the counterparts. But they are painfully mindful of the fact that the whole thing, the half of it depends on North Korea. And
Sure.
South Korea has done its half. And North Korea has to respond. And we'll have to wait and see how North Korea comes out. But for now, I don't think there's a high expectation for it.
So what about domestically, though? I mean, he's been facing this big test, right, trying to restore public trust in the government after the whole martial law crisis. How do you see his approach in terms of shaping the balance between accountability and political stability in South Korea?
Domestic politics and domestic governing, I think President Lee himself has been hugely successful. Many observers agree that he is one of the best equipped and most qualified presidents we have had for a long time. We have had continuously presidents so far for the past about 20 years, for instance, who came in with goodwill and good faith. But however, they didn't have much experience or intelligence, if you will, or knowledge or time invested in thinking about how they're going to govern the country. And every time, almost every time, we have a lot of hubris on their side, ideological motivation, emotional approach to issues and so on. But I think so far, for the last 100 years, what we have learned here in Korea is President Lee is very different. And perhaps for the first time ever since President Kim Dae-jung 20 years ago, he is coming in with a lot of information, thoughts, and careful planning about what he wants to do. And that has to do with his background as a governor of the biggest province here in Korea and also former mayor of one of the very important cities in the country. So he has built a very strong governing experience, and that seems to be showing. And the way he's reaching out to people, it's pretty good. And I think it's satisfying a lot of people on this side.
Yeah, no doubt. His approval ratings, I believe, is pretty strong now at 60% thereabouts. Well, thank you so very much for your time and thoughts, Kim Byung-ju, affiliate professor at the Hong Kong University of Foreign Studies. Well, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Beijing to heed the president's call to resolve arrears owed to private firms. South Korea's e-commerce giant in a legal win in a U.S. court over a lawsuit concerning its initial public offering on Wall Street. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and joining us now for the business news is Roland Lim. So, Roland, big news coming out of China, sitting on $1 trillion stack of IOUs, and Beijing may get state banks to pick up the tab. What's that all about?
Yeah, most likely, though, state lenders will advance cash to clear the local government debts, and that means the risk now shifts to state lenders. So, relief today, possibly moral hazard tomorrow. China is reportedly preparing to tackle the significant backlog of unpaid bills owed by local governments to the private sector, estimated by some at over $1 trillion. Bloomberg, citing sources, says the government is considering asking state lenders and policy banks, including China Development Bank, to lend to local authorities so they can make the payments in arrears. The plan would be completed by 2027. In the first phase, at least $140 billion of debt owed to private companies will be taken care of. Experts suggest the move may have been inspired by President Xi Jinping's warning that delays in government payments could erode public trust in the authorities. They also note that while the proposed assistance would offer relief to private sector contractors, it would pile more pressure on state banks already facing rising loan losses. Local government-related entities in China are estimated to owe some $1.4 trillion to corporates and civil servants, and that's equivalent to 7% of the country's GDP last year. Stocks on mainland China are higher, though, led by AI stock. Shanghai Composite ending the day 1.65% higher, Shenzhen doing better, doubling that at 3.36. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index taking a breather after climbing to its highest level in 4 years yesterday. The Chinese drug-related stocks took a pounding earlier on concerns that Washington is reportedly discussing major curbs on imported medicine from China. Hansoh Pharmaceutical plunged 18% at one point, though it did recover some of that ground to close 8.8% in the red. Hangzhou Tiger Med Consulting in Shanghai fell 4.7%. And Sichuan Kelun Biotech Biopharma sank as much as 13% at one point, paring those losses off for the day to 1.9 in the red. In the auto industry, well, Chinese car maker stocks also sliding after Mexico imposed steeper levies on Chinese and other Asian autos. Great Wall Motor leading the percentage losers, down 3.7% for the day, followed by Li Auto at 3% and Xpeng 1.9 in the red. More on that new development in the escalating tariff battle. Mexico has announced plans to impose higher tariffs on automobiles imported from China and other Asian countries. It's proposing to set the new levies as high as 50%, and that's up from 20%. 50% is the maximum allowed under World Trade Organization rules. The proposal will also see higher duties applied on goods such as textiles and steel. The Mexican government says it's part of a broader economic overhaul to protect the country from cheap imports.
¿Qué es el Plan México? Que se produzca más en México, que dejemos de importar lo que se puede producir aquí. Entonces, por eso aumentan aranceles en el marco de la Organización Mundial de Comercio a todos los países con los que no tenemos tratado. ¿Cuál es el objetivo? Fortalecer la producción nacional.
The higher tariffs will impact countries that do not have a trade deal with Mexico, including South Korea, Thailand, and India. Mexico is among the biggest destinations for cars from China. Speaking of China, China's EV brands also heating up competition in Europe. But Germany's Volkswagen has vowed to maintain its lead in the $300 billion market in a renewed push. Volkswagen's jolt to life is a turnaround from its plans to cut staff and production just a year ago. The automaker's brand chief saying that it will defend its position by, quote, all means-ness. Rivals BMW and Mercedes-Benz pushing forward with new launches and software upgrades at this year's Munich Auto Show this week. Together, the three German automakers account for just half of Europe's EV market share last month. Now, Volkswagen itself grew to 30%. That's up from the 23% it held the year before. But BMW and Mercedes seeing declines. BYD, however, is confident that it has room to grow. Its share grew to 3.8%, up from 2.5%. The Chinese automaker says it plans to bring its ultra-fast charging technology and begin producing all of its European EV models on the continent within the next 3 years. Critics, however, have cast doubt on BYD's ability to produce cars in Europe at competitive prices due to high labor and energy costs. But the automaker's executives say that it is here to stay.
We are almost ready to build our cars in Europe for Europe. Our new factory in Hungary is on track to start making cars at the end of this year. This is the real evidence of BYD staying in Europe.
China's e-commerce group Alibaba plans to raise about $3.2 billion through the sale of a zero-coupon convertible bond to strengthen its cloud computing business. Nearly 80% of the proceeds will be used to expand data centers and upgrade technology to meet rising demand for cloud computing solutions. The remaining 20% will be invested to fund its international business expansion. Alibaba is among China's most aggressive adopters of artificial intelligence. It has invested about $14 billion over the past year in AI infrastructure, product research and development. Now, one analyst we spoke to says Alibaba's convertible note offering is a sign of improving consumer and investor sentiment in China.
Whether it's the tech sector or other areas, sentiment has generally been improving. You can see that also in Hong Kong, all the activity that's going on. So I think confidence is slowly returning from all sorts of different angles. You know, the central government also has put support behind Hong Kong. They have put support on the housing market, on anti-price war measures, and many other areas. And slowly, while it hasn't been a bazooka, slowly, that's coming around. So one of the biggest hopes, I'd say, is that, you know, confidence stabilization. And when that comes through, then the savings might kick in as well. You know, over the last 5 years, roughly, Chinese households have increased average savings by over $10 trillion. So all these savings, additional savings accumulated of $10 trillion, they might help come around to stabilize further or bring back consumption to life. And ultimately, that might be sort of the biggest hope for China, even beyond the export picture.
South Korea's leading e-commerce platform, Coupang, has secured the dismissal of a U.S. lawsuit that accused it of defrauding investors during the time of its blockbuster 2021 IPO. A Manhattan District Court ruled the shareholders failed to show that Coupang and its officials had intended to defraud through misleading statements and omissions. The decision also cleared all claims against the IPO's underwriters, including Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase. The case stemmed from shareholder allegations that Coupang concealed poor working conditions, manipulated search results, and pressured suppliers to boost prices on rival platforms at the time of its U.S. listings. The complainant said that when the revelations were made, Coupang's share price plunged by more than half within a year of the IPO. Coupang, which is often dubbed the Amazon of South Korea, raised some $4.6 billion on Wall Street's biggest foreign listing since Alibaba's debut back in 2014. It was founded in Seoul, but is now headquartered in Seattle, reflecting its global ambitions amid a competitive e-commerce market in Asia. As South Korea's president giving the stock market a boost, he's no longer going to pursue a tax hike plan that would have lowered the threshold for capital gains tax on stock investments. The planned tax change had sparked public backlash among many South Korean investors. The final decision will be made by Parliament, but both the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition party are agreed that it should stay unchanged. President Lee also vowed to respond sternly to unfair trading practices such as price manipulation, among other measures to help resolve the so-called Korea discount, where local conglomerates trade at a discount as compared to their global peers. Mr. Lee floated the idea that the country's National Pension Service should step up its investment in domestic stocks. And the benchmark Kospi index rebounded into the green. The Korean won, meantime, though, down by 0.25%, 1,392.58, changing hands with $1. Japanese stocks trending higher over Fed rate cut hopes. The Nikkei 225 reaching a record high boosted by tech, energy, and utilities. Rose 2.7% in the year to August, accelerating from the previous month in a sign of sticky inflationary pressure. Adding to that buying sentiment, tech investment firm SoftBank with a nearly 10% jump today, notching a second straight day of gains. 3 Japanese petrochemical companies say they will merge their plastic-making businesses because of stiff competition they face from China's overproduction. The new entity by Mitsui Chemicals, Idemitsu Kosan, and Sumitomo Chemical is projected to account for some 40% of Japan's plastic production, which is used in products from plastic bags to electronics. Now, Mitsui will be the biggest shareholder in the entity with 52%, Idemitsu at 28%, Sumitomo with 20%. Mitsui executives say the consolidation was made to, quote, enhance competitiveness against imported products. Subtly, referencing Chinese plastic exports. Chinese customs data show that exports of plastics and organic chemical products for the first 7 months of this year reached more than $130 billion. Despite that, China's petrochemical companies face diminishing profits brought on by lowering prices due to intense competition. Sinopec's chemical business recording a near loss of some $600 million in the first half of the year, its stock price sliding more than 4% year to date. And that'll do it for business. Uchali.
All right, thanks so much for that, Roland. We are going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, the Philippines protests China's plan to establish a nature reserve at the contested Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. And a defense pact allowing Japanese and Philippine troops to enter each other's territory takes effect today. How much of a major step up is this for both sides amid heightening tensions in the Indo-Pacific? Well, we'll be speaking with an expert for insights in just a moment. Hello there, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Hundreds of South Koreans detained last week in a U.S. immigration raid have been released, bringing to an end days of all-out diplomacy between the two allies. The 316 individuals are now on their way to the airport in Atlanta, where a Korean Air chartered plane is waiting for them. Now, a defense pact between Japan and the Philippines takes effect today, which allows their troops to enter each other's territory for training and joint operations. And ASEAN leaders wrap up a days-long ministerial meetings on transnational crime, the Southeast Asian bloc seeking to strengthen its coordinated enforcement for collective security. Now, the Philippines is protesting China's plan to create a nature reserve at the disputed Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. Manila has demanded that Beijing withdraw what it calls an illegitimate and unlawful action. But Beijing says the shoal is inherently Chinese territory.
The Philippines urges China to respect the sovereignty and jurisdiction of the Philippines over Bajo de Masinloc, refrain from enforcing and immediately withdraw its State Council issuance, and comply with its obligations under international law.
中方不接受非方的无理指责和所谓的抗议，敦促非方切实停止有关侵权挑衅和肆意炒作，避免给海上局势增添复杂因素。
China yesterday announced plans for a national nature reserve at Scarborough Shoal, which it calls Huangyan Island. Its National Forestry Agency said it was to protect the diversity and ecosystem in the area. A 2016 arbitral tribunal said that the Scarborough Shoal was a fishing ground for various countries, but Beijing does not recognize that ruling. Meantime, a defense pact between Japan and the Philippines takes effect today, allowing their troops to enter each other's territory for training and joint operations. The so-called Reciprocal Access Agreement, or RAA, is seen as a major step for both sides to deepen their security cooperation, expand joint drills, logistical support, and defense technology collaboration. The Philippines is the third country to have an RAA with Japan after Australia and Britain. The pact also gives Japan the same level of military access to the Philippines that the U.S. currently enjoys through a visiting forces agreement. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., however, said that the agreements are different. He said the one with Japan does not include a base where troops can come and go. The Philippines has been ramping up its approach to respond to China's gray zone activities in the South China Sea. Authorities say they are working on a new set of internal rules to better coordinate the actions of agencies involved in contested waters. And for more on this, we are joined by Chester Cabalza, president and founder of the Manila-based think tank International Development and Security Cooperation. Well, thanks, Chester, for joining us this evening. So this new phase of military cooperation, how much of a real game changer is it for Japan and Manila in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, of course, we see it taking effect today, and this is a new security framework for defense equipment and technology cooperation. I think it differs from the visiting forces agreement with the United States, and I think what is more important here, it presents a provision for military aid and assets transfer through the official security assistance for radars and coastal surveillance, which we haven't seen in some other defense agreements of the Philippines. It took time for Japan and the Philippines to agree with the provisions of the reciprocal access agreement. And I would remember that during the state visit of President Marcos in 2023 in Japan, that was the time that he was enlightened that the Philippines should deal with the South China Sea issue and should have a new pact with Japan. And of course, it was the time that he highlighted the territorial defense. So I think this would allow more Filipino and Japanese troops for aircraft and vessel movement into each other's territory.
Now, there's also talk of boots on the ground, actually. Philippine officials, they basically hinted about these rotational deployments of Japanese forces. I mean, do you see that altering the regional security balance, especially in the South China Sea with that?
Yeah, definitely, because this is the first time that we will be having this in Southeast Asia. And I think we will expect more of Japanese participation in the annual Balikatan exercises for the Philippines. And it would also support more drills. We do not know if they would have to lead some of the joint navigation for interoperability in the Philippines. And definitely we will see more support in terms of the self-reliant defense posture that the Philippines is trying to implement right now, and we will see their support in terms of the revitalization of the national defense industry. So technically, we will see more support coming from Japan in terms of how we will see interoperability between the two militaries.
Yeah, because also this isn't just about two countries, right? I mean, it could go wider. We know that, this agreement strengthens the trilateral cooperation with the US, possibly Australia. Do you think we're starting to see the foundation of perhaps a more formalized mini alliance, system? And how far can that realistically go?
Agree with you. Yes, we have carved with multilateral agreements with the United States and Japan, and definitely this will change the security landscape in the region, given that, of course, Japan is showing some military might right now after China has shown its grandiose parade last time. And I think this will we will see some reformation of alliances in the region. And as for the multilateral agreement, we will see the reciprocal access agreement as a model for other major powers, particularly those who are engaging with the Philippines, on how they would try to carve their own defense agreements with the Philippines. The last time that I heard is that other countries like France are interested also of copying the reciprocal access agreement with the Philippines. And I think this would definitely change some of the nuances that we will see in the region in terms of the landscape, defense landscape.
So if you look under the hood, right, what gaps would you say still remain in the whole Japan-Philippines defense cooperation?
Well, definitely what we would get from this is the technology that, of course, we are aiming so far, especially now that we are aiming for a self-reliant defense posture and for the revitalization of the national defense industry. We know for a fact that Japan has been helping the Philippine Coast Guard together with the Philippine Navy in terms of their military modernization. So I think this kind of defense pact would, in a way, mutually help each other, mutually help the Philippines and Japan, and at the same time, it would also boost some confidence in terms of the interoperability of defense equipment, and definitely of the international law in terms of the freedom of navigation and overflight. So this would really help us in terms of how we see the wider Indo-Pacific region, because basically, like what you said, this is not only about the two countries, but also how do we see the dynamics of different countries in this region.
And Chester, of course, Beijing is watching all of this very closely. What do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, it's how do you expect China to respond to this pact?
Well, definitely, it's a might over might right now that we are seeing. I'm quite sure that we are vulnerable, particularly that Japan and the Philippines, together with Taiwan, are part of the first island chain, that if ever there would be some commotions coming from us, from these cooperation of like-minded nations, definitely China would take some actions. We see more brazen aggression coming from China, and at the same time, they will try to of course, create some of their multilateral cooperation with other countries in order for us to, of course, concede with this kind of defense pact that we are having right now with Japan. But definitely, of course, we are optimistic that this would definitely strengthen the military modernization of the Philippines together with Japan, and at the same time, this is a new cycle of what we are expecting from South China Sea and at the same time in the Indo-Pacific region.
So, okay, Chester, let's just zoom out a little, just looking ahead. I mean, this pact, right, primarily, do you think it's a deterrence that they're signaling to China, or it's sort of like the beginning of a deeper military integration in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, of course, we can look at it in a multi-pronged perspective. Yes, I do agree that it's a deterrence mechanism, particularly that, of course, China recently, in its last parade this month, it showed its might, and definitely, of course, we would see the middle power coalition coming from the region just to deter China's might, and at the same time, it's an added a pact on how we look at the participation of other countries now, particularly that in the Philippine history, of course, we have seen how the United States had allied with us, and we were only using that kind of alliance mechanism and cooperation, defense cooperation with them. This time around, we are trying to diversify it, and I think it only shows that the region is very dynamic in terms of how we are engaging with these different kinds of power. And I think it's a game-changing pact because, of course, this is the first time in Southeast Asia, and at the same time, it proposes a different axis of power in terms of the alliance movement in the region. And at the same time, it also sends a message that China is not the only strong nation in this region. If you will see a coalition of the middle powers, then definitely it could counter China's might, and it would deter expected conflicts in the region.
Well, thanks so very much for that discussion. Lots of insights there. Chester Cabalza, president and founder of the Manila think tank, International Development and Security Cooperation. Well, on that note, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, ASEAN leaders are wrapping up a days-long meeting to boost collective security amid a rise in cross-border crime. Violence in Nepal appearing to subside following 2 days of deadly protests in the country. Well, military forces have taken control of security in the Himalayan country in the wake of the unrest, which left at least 25 people dead and more than 600 injured. Officials say soldiers have begun clearing roads while firefighters have been deployed. The easing in violence comes as Nepal faces political uncertainty after former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli resigned under public pressure from the protests. Demonstrators have now called for former Chief Justice Sushila Karki to serve as interim leader and head of transitional government, following talks with military officials in Kathmandu.
सर्वसम्मत रूपमा जेनजीद्वारा हाई एथिकल भएको व्यक्ति निष्पक्ष व्यक्तिलाई हामीले सर्वसम्मति रूपमा सुशीला कार्की ज्यूलाई अन्तरिम सरकार बनाउनको निमित्त सिफारिस गरेका छौं.
Well, they are demanding the dissolution of parliament and new elections within 6 to 12 months. They have also stipulated the rewriting of the constitution with active youth participation. The 2 days of demonstrations sparked by a short-lived government ban on social media were the worst unrest Nepal has seen in decades. Now, aside from street clashes, authorities say some 13,000 prisoners were set free from jails in all 77 districts, the turmoil having an impact on some of Nepal's neighbours. India has tightened security along its border with the Himalayan nation to prevent any violence from spilling over. Nepal shares a largely open border of more than 1,700 kilometres with 5 Indian states: Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Sikkim, Bihar and West Bengal. ASEAN leaders have wrapped up a ministerial meeting on transnational crime. The gathering in Malaysia, part of the bloc's efforts to strengthen enforcement for collective security amid a rise of cross-border crime. Now, in the most recent example, Singapore and Cambodian police had successfully conducted a joint operation to disrupt a criminal syndicate carrying out scams in Singapore. The syndicate was operating out of Phnom Penh, and more than $1.9 million worth of funds were seized on Tuesday, and a dozen suspects have been arrested. For more, CNA's senior correspondent Melissa Go, she joins us live from Melaka. So, Mel, first up, share with us what else was talked about about this joint operation.
Well, observers say that this is a clear case of putting words into action. Now, Singapore and Cambodian police force, they've been working on this for months now after receiving victims' reports last December. Now, a joint raid was held both in Singapore and Phnom Penh on September 9, just 3 days ago, where Singapore Police, CID and the Intelligence Department raided multiple locations in residential apartments, in hotel rooms in Singapore, and leading to the arrest of 9 Singaporeans, 2 Malaysians and 1 Filipino. Now, all 12 were charged today for government officials impersonation scams. Now, basically, they were suspects out acting as callers on behalf of the syndicates, impersonating as banking staff, who would then direct the victims to another scammer that would then impersonate as police or the Monetary Authority of Singapore's officials, deceiving victims into disclosing their banking details and transferring huge sums of money to the syndicates in Cambodia. Now, the Cambodian police have also carried out raids on a warehouse in Phnom Penh and discovered electronic devices and paper trail and so on. Now, this is believed to be a syndicate responsible for more than 300 reported cases in Singapore involving losses of over $20 million. Now, I caught up with the Singapore Minister of State for Home Affairs on the sideline of the ASEAN meeting on transnational crime here in Melaka, and this is what he said.
Through extensive information sharing, joint investigations and operations, we are able to take down this scam center in Phnom Penh, and we are able to freeze various bank accounts and cryptocurrency wallets, seizing amounts about $2.5 million. So this is an indication of the success of our collaboration working with fellow ASEAN member states. And this is an area that we will need to continue to work more closely in going forward.
But Mr. Goh said, the fight is not over. It's important to remain vigilant. The public, he said, the syndicate's operation, although it's now disrupted, they are not gone. Lots of members are still out there at large. And Singapore, he said, will continue to work with counterparts across the region to bring these people to justice.
So aside from Singapore, the ASEAN members, they also had a meeting today with dialogue partners talking about like from China, Japan and South Korea. What came out of that?
Well, lots of discussion. Basically, we're focusing on capacity building. Now, Japan in particular was expressing keen interest and commitment to continue to train and share their experiences and their expertise in busting cybercrime against misuse of AI and crypto fraud to hide the money trail. Now, China, meanwhile, emphasized on greater sharing of information, real-time sharing of information and intel to analyze big data, while Vietnam is calling for joint efforts to locate, apprehend, and deport fugitives. They were also calls by other ASEAN leaders and ASEAN section to expand the consultation to other partners from Europe and US. Now, Chinese Vice Minister of Public Security, Wang Zizong, who spoke at the consultation this morning with the ASEAN leaders, reaffirmed Beijing's commitment to assist the region in the fight against cybercrime. Let's take a listen.
为我们完善区域公共安全治理体系，深化打击跨国犯罪合作，共筑中国东盟安宁家园。
But Vice Minister Wang, who's also in charge of the immigration, declined to comment when asked about Malaysian fugitive Shoal, remember, the one that's responsible for the multi-billion-dollar scandal in Malaysia, and his whereabouts. Let's take a listen.
你能不能够肯定刘这种人不在中国？
我们我们今天开了个会。
Well, there you have it. I mean, real-time sharing of information is key to enable timely enforcement. Now, Malaysia's Home Minister, Saifuddin Nasution, in wrapping up this three-day meeting, in unveiling the 10-year action plan for ASEAN, stressed that while there are problems among neighbors, such as the border conflicts between, Thailand and Cambodia and the political uncertainties across, ASEAN will always leverage and work based on things that they can unite together, which is in waging war against the common enemy, the transnational crime syndicates.
Many thanks for that report, Melissa Goh, speaking to us live from Melaka. Pacific Island nations have launched their own climate action fund aimed at helping tackle the impact of global warming. The move said to stem from growing frustration among the bloc as they face challenges getting the resources that they need. Solomon Islands Prime Minister Jeremiah Manale said that structural barriers had made access to global funds, quote, too slow, too little, too complex and unpredictable. The establishment of a Pacific-led fund comes after a decade-long effort. While operational details are yet to be fully worked out, finance ministers from the Pacific Islands Forum member states will oversee its use. Now, officials hope to reach at least $500 million in capitalization with returns from investments used to finance projects. So far, the fund has only amassed some $160 million in pledges, with Australia, Japan and Saudi Arabia among countries contributing. While the region is also counting on the US to be a part of it. Washington pledged $5 million in 2023 and a further $20 million last year. But going forward, it's unclear how America's commitments will pan out, given that the country's position on tackling climate change has changed dramatically after Donald Trump took office this year. And before we go, some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. South China Morning Post says that the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force has terminated nearly 200 partnerships with experts and suppliers after an investigation into corruption covering the past 9 years. Over in Taiwan, foreign spouses of citizens will also be eligible for a universal 10,000 Taiwanese dollar handout. Well, that's about $330. Taiwan News says the National Development Council estimates the cash handout program could lift GDP by about 0.4 percentage points. In Japan, NHK says weather officials are warning people in and around Tokyo's Shinagawa ward after record rainfall in a short period. Residents are told to stay safe. And that's all we've got for you for this Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.